Argue, sit.
I'm in a public plaza. Here are my credentials. Tell me the legal basis for detaining me.
Stop reaching. Step aside while I verify.
My hands are visible. Am I free to go, yes or no?
No, you're being uncooperative.
The sun hung low over downtown Chicago, casting long shadows across the Courthouse plaza. Robert Hayes stood near the marble steps adjusting his tie as he prepared for the morning Judicial Review Board meeting. The air carried the sharp scent of roasted coffee from a nearby cafe mingling with exhaust fumes from the traffic along State Street. People bustled past, unaware of the tension about to unfold. "Sir, sit down," Officer Johnson said, his voice firm, eyes narrowing as he stepped closer. Robert froze, disbelief flashing across his face. "Excuse me, why am I being asked to sit? I haven't done anything," he replied, his tone calm but edged with incredulity. The officer's hand hovered near his service weapon, though it was not drawn, his posture rigid and authoritative. A few pedestrians slowed, sensing the confrontation, while a security camera above the plaza silently recorded every movement. The misunderstanding began moments earlier. A guard had reported a suspicious person lingering near the courthouse entrance. The description was vague. A black man, medium build, standing near the steps. No mention of any criminal action. No reports of theft. Just a generic alert that somehow flagged Robert. Johnson's mind filtered this through his own biases, the initial trigger of suspicion crystallizing into an urgent need to assert control. Robert kept his hands visible, slowly reaching into his coat to retrieve his ID. "Officer, I am a member of the Judicial Review Board. Here are my credentials." "I am standing in a public area lawfully," he said, extending a laminated badge. Johnson glanced briefly at the ID but did not take it seriously. "Step aside while I verify," he said, his voice rising slightly. The tension thickened, the crowd began to murmur, some taking out their phones, recording the encounter. Time seemed to stretch as the situation escalated. Robert's legal instincts told him this stop lacked probable cause. Johnson, however, was locked into the role of enforcer. Each second of hesitation felt like a challenge to his authority. Pedestrians exchanged glances, the plaza filled with the subtle crescendo of whispered judgments and the distant hum of city life. Robert tried to reason, citing the Fourth Amendment, asserting his rights calmly. "Officer, this is an unlawful detention. I am asking if I am free to go." The officer stepped closer, his tone colder. "You're being uncooperative." "Sit down now," he commanded. Robert hesitated only a moment before complying under protest, documenting everything, mentally aware of the witnesses, aware that every gesture, every word could become evidence. The air was thick with unspoken tension. A few onlookers whispered to one another, "Is he seriously arresting a member of the review board for standing there?" The absurdity of the moment settled in like a storm about to break. Slow-motion details unfolded as Robert lowered himself onto the steps. The clink of metal as he set down his briefcase, the faint scrape of his shoes against stone, the slight rise of anxiety in his chest. Johnson's eyes darted around, assessing potential witnesses, the crowd now swelling with curiosity and concern. Robert's mind raced with legal options even as his body remained still, projecting calm and control. The confrontation was no longer about suspicion. It was about power perception and the weight of assumptions. The plaza was alive with the sound of distant traffic, the murmur of the growing crowd, and the subtle click of cameras capturing history in real time. A misunderstanding that should have ended in a brief exchange of words had spiraled into a tense public standoff. Robert, poised yet alert, met Johnson's gaze, holding his ground. The scene set the stage for what would soon become a story of injustice, revelation, and accountability. Robert Hayes was born in Chicago's South Side, the son of a teacher and a factory worker. From an early age, he learned the value of perseverance, of standing up for what is right, even when the world seemed indifferent. He graduated top of his class in law school, driven by a desire to challenge systemic injustice and protect civil rights. For over 15 years, Robert had built a reputation for fairness and integrity, serving on the Judicial Review Board, where he investigated complaints against law enforcement officers, reviewed internal disciplinary actions, and ensured accountability in the justice system. He had witnessed firsthand the impact of unchecked authority, yet he remained steadfast, believing that the law could protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful to account. His path was not without sacrifice. Robert had spent countless late nights reviewing case files, advising victims of misconduct, and mentoring young attorneys who aspired to serve public interest law. He had missed family events, birthdays, and anniversaries to ensure that justice was not delayed. His peers often described him as meticulous and unyielding, a man whose calm demeanor masked an unbreakable resolve. Robert had saved careers, corrected wrongful convictions, and advocated tirelessly for reforms that made the system fairer for everyone. Every decision he made carried weight. He understood the human cost behind every policy, every procedural review. Officer Johnson's backstory painted a stark contrast. He grew up in a predominantly white suburb where law enforcement was seen as an unquestioned authority. Joining the police force at 21, he quickly moved through the ranks, praised for his decisiveness and ability to maintain control. But beneath the accolades was a pattern of behavior that had gone largely unchecked. Over his 8 years on the force, Johnson had faced multiple complaints alleging racial profiling and excessive force. Some complaints were formally sustained, others quietly dismissed or closed with insufficient evidence. Supervisors often regarded him as a results-driven officer, someone who got the job done even if methods were aggressive. Johnson's interactions with minority communities were tense, often escalating minor situations into confrontations. Colleagues described him as defensive and highly sensitive to perceived disrespect or challenges to his authority. Implicit biases had gone unaddressed, and a lack of rigorous accountability mechanisms allowed them to shape his decision-making. This combination of past grievances, unchecked power, and personal pride set the stage for his encounter with Robert Hayes. The very traits that had earned him recognition, confidence, assertiveness, now became catalysts for misjudgment and escalation. Understanding the backgrounds of both men reveals the deeper forces at play in that morning encounter. Robert's experience, legal knowledge, and composure contrasted sharply with Johnson's insecurity biases and insistence on authority. The collision of these two histories made the seemingly simple request to sit down far more than a routine interaction. It was a confrontation of life experiences, of moral frameworks, and of the persistent influence of systemic prejudice, setting the stage for the events that would unfold on the Courthouse Plaza. Robert Hayes raised his hands, slowly, palms visible, trying to maintain composure. "Officer, I have already shown my credentials. I am a member of the Judicial Review Board. I am lawfully standing here," he said, his voice calm but firm. Johnson's eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. He seemed unwilling to accept any explanation, as if acknowledging Robert's credentials would somehow diminish his own authority. The air was thick with tension, punctuated by distant car horns and the murmur of onlookers. A few pedestrians had stopped in their tracks, instinctively pulling out phones. Some whispered to each other, debating the legitimacy of the officer's actions. "Why is he being treated like this?" one passerby asked, glancing at the scene. Another responded, "He's standing there legally. That officer is overreacting." The crowd's attention added a new layer of pressure, each witness becoming an involuntary participant in the unfolding drama. Robert attempted to reason further. "Officer, I am not resisting. I am asking if I am free to leave. There is no basis for continued detention." His words were measured, calculated, yet the officer's expression remained unyielding. Johnson's hand rested near his holster, a subtle but clear reminder of the potential for escalation. The tension stretched like a taut wire. One misstep could snap the situation into chaos. In the background, a security camera on the courthouse facade captured the interaction in grainy detail. People began recording on their phones, capturing every gesture and word. Johnson noticed them occasionally, his eyes flicking toward the lenses, yet he did not relent. He seemed trapped by a combination of ego, prior experiences, and implicit biases. Each passing second solidified his need to assert control regardless of the legality of his actions. Robert's inner thoughts were a mix of calculation and patience. He knew every movement, every word was being observed and would later serve as evidence if the situation escalated further. "Stay calm. Do not give them an excuse," he reminded himself silently. Meanwhile, Johnson's stance reflected a fear of losing face, a deep-rooted sensitivity to perceived challenges. His mind raced through scenarios in which backing down might be seen as weakness, feeding his refusal to de-escalate. The crowd grew slightly a mix of curiosity and quiet disapproval. A young man in a business suit whispered, "This is wrong. He's done nothing." Someone else muttered, "Look at him standing there politely and they're treating him like a criminal." The whispers and low murmurs acted like a mirror reflecting the tension between authority and justice, bias and reason. Robert kept his focus, ensuring his body language conveyed compliance without conceding guilt. Every interaction, every glance between Robert and Johnson was magnified by the audience surrounding them. The officer's internal struggle between ego and procedure created micro-escalations. A step forward, a slightly raised voice, a tightening of the jaw. The more Robert asserted his legal position calmly, the more Johnson's reactions became unpredictable. The scene had transformed from a simple confrontation into a public theater of power bias and scrutiny. Johnson finally made his move. "Sir, hands behind your back." "You are being detained for non-compliance," he said, though Robert had done nothing but stand legally. Robert slowly turned his body deliberate, projecting calm while internally cataloging every detail for evidence. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed faintly sharp against the distant city noise. Pedestrians gasped, some whispered, others recorded every motion. Robert felt the cold metal bite into his wrists, a physical reminder of the officer's misjudgment. His gaze scanned the crowd, several witnesses watching intently, smartphones raised recording history. He inhaled steadily, forcing his heart rate down, aware that any sudden movement could escalate the situation further. Johnson guided him to the patrol car, each step deliberate, maintaining a rigid posture, his own tension palpable. The backseat of the patrol car smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. Robert settled carefully onto the hard plastic, his mind racing through legal strategies. 2 hours of preparation for a simple meeting now seemed trivial against the absurdity of his detention. Johnson sat in the driver's seat, glancing at Robert repeatedly through the rearview mirror, wrestling with the gnawing suspicion that this stop was already a mistake but refusing to admit it. The vehicle started moving slowly, merging into the busy city streets. Robert observed the small gestures of others outside, people noticing the handcuffs, the uniform, and the calm demeanor of the detainee. The contrast was stark. Here was a man fully compliant, visibly professional, yet treated as a threat for no reason other than bias and misperception. Every red light, every honk, every turn of the car seemed amplified, marking time in slow motion, as Robert's legal mind cataloged violations, unlawful detention, racial profiling, violation of constitutional rights. Johnson finally spoke, his voice low but tense. "We'll verify your information. Just sit tight." The words sounded hollow against the reality of the unjust act he had initiated. Robert did not respond, his calm silence a form of resistance. Inside, he was planning the lawsuit, noting witnesses, timing, and procedures, transforming humiliation into strategic preparation. The silence between them was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the engine and the muffled city noises outside. When they arrived at the precinct, the tension in the car lingered. Robert stepped out, handcuffed, each movement deliberate, his composure intact. The fluorescent lighting of the booking area reflected off his calm expression, contrasting sharply with Johnson's rigid stance. Processing began mechanically, every step recorded, every document scanned, each badge checked against his credentials. Robert remained still, observing the process, aware that each official act was now part of a growing body of evidence. Time slowed further as the booking officer, a seasoned veteran, immediately recognized Robert's credentials. The atmosphere shifted subtly. The officer's posture became professional, cautious, aware of the potential consequences of Johnson's overreach. Johnson, however, could not undo the act. He had initiated the injustice, and Robert's calm, methodical composure only highlighted the officer's error. The moment encapsulated the absurdity of the encounter, a man detained unlawfully while carrying proof of authority and legitimacy, a living testament to the cost of bias and unchecked assumptions. The fluorescent lights of the precinct flickered faintly as Robert Hayes sat in the holding area, his wrists still lightly tingling from the handcuffs. Johnson paced nearby, restless, occasionally glancing at Robert with a mix of irritation and unease. The tension in the air was thick, almost tactile, as other officers went about routine processing, unaware of the gravity of the situation. A senior lieutenant, Marcus Freeman, entered the room, his expression immediately serious. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice measured but commanding. Johnson quickly explained, emphasizing the non-compliance and suspicious behavior that had prompted the detention. Freeman's eyes flicked to Robert, who remained calm, composed, his demeanor unwavering. Robert spoke clearly, presenting his credentials once more. Lieutenant Freeman, I am Robert Hayes, a member of the Judicial Review Board. I was detained without reasonable suspicion and my constitutional rights have been violated. He placed the laminated board ID along with a federal identification card on the counter. Freeman's eyes widened slightly as he examined the credentials. The room seemed to hold its breath. Johnson's posture stiffened, the color draining from his face. He leaned closer to the counter, squinting as if the legitimacy of the ID could somehow be questioned by sheer disbelief. You're a member of the review board? He asked, his voice faltering. Robert nodded calmly, maintaining eye contact. Yes, and this detention is entirely without legal basis. Freeman picked up the phone, calling the board offices to verify Robert's status. Within minutes, confirmation arrived. Robert Hayes was indeed a legitimate board member. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. Johnson's eyes flickered with panic and shame, realizing the magnitude of his error. The authority he had attempted to assert moments before now felt hollow, stripped bare by the clarity of the truth. Nearby officers exchanged subtle glances, some shocked, some silently amused at the irony. The presence of witnesses' security cameras and Robert's unflappable demeanor amplified the humiliation. Freeman turned to Johnson, his voice firm. You need to release him immediately and document this properly. This is a serious procedural error. Johnson nodded slowly, swallowing hard, his pride wounded. Robert was uncuffed with deliberate calm, his movements steady and dignified. The air of authority that he carried naturally seemed to fill the room, contrasting sharply with Johnson's tentative, unsure posture. Every officer present sensed the gravity of the mistake, the clear violation of law and protocol. The revelation was complete, an unlawful detention of a high-ranking, respected member of the justice system, and the officer responsible now faced the stark reality of accountability. As Robert gathered his belongings, the room was silent except for the low hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint click of the ID cards being returned. Johnson lingered at the periphery, his earlier confidence replaced by a mixture of fear and realization. This single undeniable truth had shattered his authority. Robert Hayes was not only compliant, but powerful, knowledgeable, and entirely within his rights. The revelation set the stage for the next chapter, a legal and social reckoning that would challenge Johnson's judgment, the procedures of the precinct, and the systemic biases that allowed this injustice to occur. The moment was not just personal, but symbolic, a stark demonstration of how unchecked authority and prejudice can collide with truth and justice in the most public, undeniable way. Robert Hayes wasted no time. Within hours of his release, he began documenting every detail, timestamps from the surveillance cameras, witness statements, and the exact sequence of Officer Johnson's commands and actions. By the end of the day, he had contacted a civil rights attorney preparing a federal lawsuit alleging unlawful detention, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, racial profiling, and abuse of authority. Every word, every gesture from the plaza and the precinct would become evidence in a meticulously prepared legal case. The story spread quickly. Video footage from pedestrians' phones circulated on social media, garnering millions of views within 24 hours. Comments flooded in, expressing outrage, disbelief, and support for Robert. Legal experts began analyzing the encounter publicly, breaking down every violation Johnson had committed, highlighting the broader implications for police accountability. News outlets picked up the story, transforming a personal encounter into a nationwide conversation about bias, authority, and civil rights. Meanwhile, the San Francisco Police Department initiated an internal investigation. Johnson was suspended pending review, and the department's internal affairs team began combing through his past complaints, patterns of stops, and prior reports of misconduct. The investigation revealed troubling trends. Stops involving black citizens, disproportionately high searches, frequently conducted without proper justification, and complaints previously ignored or dismissed without action. The data confirmed a systemic pattern, reinforcing the necessity of Robert's legal challenge. Johnson's career unraveled rapidly. His appeal against suspension was denied after review of the video and corroborating evidence. Weeks later, he was formally terminated, the letter citing multiple violations: unlawful detention, racial profiling, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The termination made him ineligible for employment in law enforcement elsewhere, his reputation irreparably damaged. The lawsuit proceeded efficiently. Depositions, video evidence, and witness testimonies painted a clear picture. A compliant, legally protected individual was unlawfully detained because of racial bias and unchecked authority. Settlement negotiations resulted in a substantial financial compensation, for Robert Hayes intended both to address the harm suffered and to serve as a warning for systemic reform. Robert, however, publicly donated the settlement to organizations working on police accountability and civil rights education, emphasizing that his goal was not personal gain, but systemic change. The incident prompted broader reforms. The department implemented mandatory implicit bias training for all officers, established stricter oversight for officers with prior complaints, and mandated the verification of credentials for individuals claiming official authority in non-emergency encounters. Quarterly audits of stop-and-frisk practices were introduced along with independent civilian oversight with subpoena power. Robert's confrontation became a case study in law enforcement training, illustrating both the perils of bias and the importance of procedural compliance. Through meticulous documentation, legal expertise, and public advocacy, Robert transformed a deeply personal injustice into a catalyst for accountability and reform. Officer Johnson's termination, the systemic reforms, and the widespread public awareness represented a form of justice rarely achieved in such clear and comprehensive terms. For Robert, the victory was not merely financial or professional. It was the affirmation that truth, law, and ethical conduct could prevail over prejudice, arrogance, and institutional failures. The case of Robert Hayes illustrates fundamental principles of constitutional law. The Fourth Amendment protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures. Robert's detention lacked probable cause or reasonable suspicion, making it a clear violation. Additionally, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment prohibits discriminatory treatment based on race, which was evident in Johnson's actions. Legal precedents, including Arizona vs. Johnson and Terry v. Ohio, affirm that mere presence in a public space cannot justify detention, especially when no criminal activity is observed. Understanding these laws empowers citizens to recognize when their rights are being infringed. Beyond legal implications, the encounter highlights social and psychological dynamics of bias. Officer Johnson's behavior demonstrates implicit bias and the influence of stereotype threat, where assumptions about race shaped his perception of threat and authority. Even experienced officers can fall prey to unconscious prejudices that distort judgment, escalate conflicts, and create unnecessary harm. Recognizing such biases requires both institutional training and individual self-awareness. The incident serves as a stark reminder that professional credentials or compliance alone do not always protect individuals from prejudice-driven actions. For viewers, practical steps can mitigate similar situations. First, remain calm and composed. Document every detail: time, location, actions, and witnesses. Use phones or cameras to capture the interaction if safe. Second, verbally assert your rights, referencing applicable laws and constitutional protections without escalating conflict. Third, immediately consult legal counsel to preserve evidence and pursue accountability. Fourth, report the incident through proper channels, and when appropriate, leverage media or public attention to amplify systemic issues. These steps convert a potentially dangerous encounter into a structured, evidence-based response. The Robert Hayes story also serves as a broader educational tool. It demonstrates how personal courage, legal knowledge, and calm presence of mind can turn injustice into reform. His experience catalyzed systemic change, highlighting the critical role of advocacy in ensuring that rights are not merely theoretical, but actively protected. By studying such incidents, communities, law enforcement, and policymakers can better understand the consequences of bias, the importance of procedural compliance, and the mechanisms available for redress. Ultimately, this story calls for vigilance, awareness, and action. Viewers are invited to question assumptions, recognize implicit bias in themselves and others, and advocate for fair treatment in all spheres of life. The case underscores that justice is not only about personal outcomes, but about cultivating systems where accountability, transparency, and equality are foundational. Everyone has a role in challenging prejudice, promoting awareness, and supporting reforms that prevent the repetition of such injustices. It is a call to engage, to learn, and to act when rights are threatened.